everyone, and welcome to Bichitra Collective's Let's Talk. Bichitra is a collective of women filmmakers. It's a network to support, to offer allies, a space to chat, or whatever else that we want to make of it. I'm Samina Mishra. I'm a filmmaker, a writer, and a teacher, and I'm based in Delhi. Much of my work examines the world through the lens of childhood and growing up. And I also write for children. So today in this episode of Let's Talk, I'll be in conversation with Priya Giri Desai, a producer and director based in Boston, who's also been involved in creating content for children for several years. I'm really grateful to the thoughtful curators of Let's Talk, Farah and Zainab, who've created this opportunity for us to meet and to chat as fellow filmmakers with similar concerns. So Priya, should we begin at the beginning with how we came to children's content?
Let's do it. Let's do it. So thank you to Bichitra. The whole journey with Bichitra actually began when I met Vaishali Sinha, who's a documentary filmmaker based in Brooklyn. We happened to have films kind of doing the festival circuit at the same time. And from there, I'm now here with you, Samina, which is awesome. So to your original question about kind of how it all began for me in kids' content, quite by chance, here in the West, there are people who set out to say, when I grow up, I want to make cartoons for kids, or I want to make movies for kids. That's because of a whole industry that is supported and propped up here. We will talk about that later. But I did not say that. In fact, I actually didn't even enter my working life thinking I was ever going to make television shows or films or anything like that. I wanted to write. I wanted to write for magazines, and that's what I was doing. And I was doing that quite happily. And then I had to move. And in that move, I was looking for opportunities where I was going to be, which actually was here in Boston. And what I recognized is that there was a very, very sort of fruitful and happening scene of making public television here in America. Right here in Boston. About a third of everything that's produced for PBS is made in Boston. Wow. And it just so happened that there was an opening for a job on a kids show. And I had never considered that before. But what interested me, and I think this is the thing that has kind of helped me along my way the entire journey, is it involved documentary filmmaking. And it involved finding stories. The finding stories part I'd always been doing as a freelance writer. And the documentary film part was really like a curiosity for me. So the kid part, I was kind of like, sure, I'll take it, no problem. And when it happened, when I took that job, which is a series that was on PBS called Postcards From Buster, it's a spinoff of a very, very popular animated series here called Arthur. When I took that job, what I realized is all the things that I was starting to recognize that were important to me in my work were, magnified, amplified 100 times for kids, meaning their impact was that much greater. And I think I realized, there's this lane in media making where when you talk the talk of representation and impact and all those wonderful things that we all try and do in our work, you really mean it in kids' content. You have the opportunity to really do that and have impact in kids' content. So that's where it all began for me. How about you?
Well, actually, I did start out. Well, I did say that I wanted to make stuff for kids, So when I was in college, I studied mass communication. Many of my college projects were, for children. So, stories for children or about children or, all of that. So in some ways, I think I wanted to do that. And I remember also before that, saying that I wanted to write for kids and saying this, like, write for kids as a very specific thing. When I look back at it, I'm not sure how that happened, but I do remember this. So I said that, but we don't actually have what you're describing in America. We don't have that here, and we certainly didn't have it in the 90s when I'd graduated. And when I grew up as a child, there was some dedicated kind of programming for children on television. But by the 90s, a lot of it was sort of repurposed redubbed, that kind of thing. So there was not a lot of opportunity to do that. Funnily, just as I sort of graduated, there was all these various channels hadn't started, and there was this brief interlude of something called the video magazine that used to be produced. So there were these news video magazines, so every fortnight or every month, and there were these VHS tapes, and you could buy them or you could get a subscription, just like a regular magazine.
Yep.
So PTI TV decided to do one for children, which was the first thing which I'd never heard of. So I got a job on that, but it never really took off because the landscape changed so fast, and it was such a time of flux. So VHS was out of the window very soon and all of that. But I kind of like held on to that. So of course I did documentary work, and I'm really I think the documentary work is really important to what I do now, because the whole thing of observing and drawing upon the world around you, all of that has come because of my documentary practice. So I held on to that desire and kind of channeled it into the children's writing space, where at that time, much more, it was more open and more things were being experimented with, And so that's how it sort of has continued. A little bit of this and a little bit of that.
That sounds very familiar. And I would say it's funny because we wend our way in and out of things from a career perspective. I'm sure you can relate to that. It's only now, kind of, 20 plus years in, that I see a through line, that I see a clear path, that I see patterns, and that I see intention that has been consistent over time. How I expressed it or how it manifested may have changed, but I think it's something important to say for anyone who might listen to this, who's maybe, on the front end of their 20 years and just starting out. So
I have a friend who runs a wonderful library program in Goa, and I was telling her that I think that in my journey, I've been very fortunate that I met people who talking to whom or working with them has helped me to sort of, take that left fork or the right fork on the path, right? And I said that I feel that has been so important for my work and my practice. And she said to me that, Samina, don't think that it's not just serendipity, it's also something that you're putting out there, which you don't know. And as individuals, I think we do that,
That's right.
Subconsciously, we are making these choices based on something which we have thought through.
That's exactly right. I do think that intention that you put out into the world finally gets answered. I agree with that. I agree with that. I always wondered about, it's so interesting that you and I are having this conversation because, in some sense, we're kind of representing both what's happening in India and the diaspora, and how the diaspora deals with being South Asian, being Indian, which are two wildly different cultures actually, and I've come to appreciate that. But I kind of wonder how you in India, in your work, in your writing, in your filmmaking, are thinking about this idea of representation in front of and behind the camera, because I know what it means in America. There's a very particular cultural moment that we're in, where all those things are very heightened and important. But I would just love to hear kind of what you think about those ideas.
Yeah, no, I think even for us, it is something that is so critical. When I first started working, we used to be we were like the privileged middle class English speaking elite, and we would be going into the spaces that were exactly the opposite of that, and we would be creating those representations, so in that process, I mean, that in itself there is something problematic going on there, but in that process we had to ask ourselves these very difficult questions of how am I representing that space and that character and all of that. I think that things have changed, and there is more work which is happening, which is being created by people actually coming from those kinds of spaces. But we have a very, very long road to go. There's much, much more to be done. But I think particularly when, writing for children, or in work that I have done where, it's not for children, but it has been about children, like films that have been about children, this is a very big part of it, So thinking about, who are the characters that I pick? What do I show them as? Am I, the busty child is not just poor, right? There's many more things, many more layers to that child. So what am I, and how am I going to show that? What about play? What about aspirations? What about desire? All of those things.
Absolutely.
I'm sure those are true for you. I saw some things of what you had done, and that struck me. You chose to represent the family with the mother doing something quite adventurous in a small way, but adventurous still, isn't it?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Filming the characters doing something in particular rather than something else.
Yeah. Well, perfect segue, because I've thought about that clip a lot. And we filmed it years ago in Chennai. This was for the children's show that I was telling you guys about, Postcards from Buster. The basic premise of that show, it's very interesting. It was a response to 9/11 happening in America. Essentially, public television said, we need to do a better job of exposing American children to cultures all over the world. They should be appreciative of it. They should grow into appreciative adults, essentially, and open-minded adults. And so we made this series that explored families and children and cultures all over America, but then eventually it went international. And I pitched and did an episode of this show in Chennai. And my job as a producer and a director were to find the families and kids that were going to be in this show. And I did that in a number of ways. And we happened upon this lovely family with a little boy named Nandan, who I now think must be, a teenager at least, if not grown and gone. He was a lovely little boy, and his family was equally as lovely. And there was something very kind of both contemporary about his upbringing, very progressive family, but also very traditional in a South Indian way that I'm very familiar with, since my family is originally from Bangalore. And we filmed them at home. And, part of what we're talking about, this idea of, kind of like the filmmaker's gaze, the filmmaker's perspective, that can be a hammer that comes down on a story, or you can be kind of like a light hummingbird who has built some trust and taken some time and is allowed then to buzz amongst, a group of characters and tell their story in obviously in a subjective way, but in the sort of lightest touch way that you can.
We'll see the garden.
What's in the garden?
This is our coconut tree. There is only one coconut in it.
Oh, I see it.
There's a banana tree up there. It reaches my window. You can see it from there. And this is our mango sapling.
Wow, it's like you have a grocery store in your backyard. Too bad there isn't a pizza tree.
And this is our Nellika maram, meaning gooseberry tree.
Would you like some, Buster?
Yes, please.
All right.
Amma climbs up the tree and shakes them.
Yeah, you want to catch some?
Over here! Over here!
Rain!
Watch out!
I caught one! I caught one!
And one fell in your camera.
Can I try it?
Well, this one is good.
It's so lovely to see that, I feel that this idea of the everyday, that has been very critical also for me. That in my work, that is actually, I find the everyday. So I don't think I've told stories that are, on that big canvas. That's not been mine. Mine have been the little stories and the, everyday moments which actually reveal to us who we are and what the possibilities are, because there are possibilities that lie in the everyday,
Exactly.
And also the challenges,
This is for children. There is nothing condescending about this kind of storytelling. We're not telling them what to think. We're not telling them what their values should be. We're not telling them right from wrong. I think when you approach, storytelling for and about children from the point of view that you're just storytelling, so much more is opened up, and the importance of those small moments, like you're talking about, become revealed.
While it contains the possibility, it also reveals to us the challenges.
Yes.
And this comes up very often, I think, when you're just sort of hanging around with children. I like what you said about, being like a hummingbird, and you're just there, sort of. It's not that you are a fly on the wall. You cannot be that once you have the camera. You are very much present, and everybody is very much aware of you. But if you spend enough time, or I think it's not even so much about time, but about the approach that you go with, and if you are really interested in that child, really interested in that child's story and what the child wants to say, then you get that access. I think it's that. And for me, one of the films that I made many years ago, I followed. So it was actually a commissioned work for UNICEF. And I worked with a family in a village in Punjab, and it was in the context of this sort of female feticide rate in Amritsar district being very low, and, all of that. And so it was a set of 3 films on the girl child. What does it mean to be a girl child in a context which looks at women and the role of women and what these girl children have to grow up to become in a certain way? What does it mean? The challenge for me was, how do I talk about this without actually turning these people into the villains? Because they're not actually the villains of the story.
Right.
That's like the villain is the structure of patriarchy and, policy and all of those things. So how do I do that? Particularly when they open themselves up to you.
Right. And they were so generous.
Yeah. So for me, it is this, that how can I practice a kind of gentleness in the practice, in the filmmaking process. And so I try to do that in the film by, talking to the children in a certain way, actually being interested in what they have to say and observing once we had got a little bit comfortable. So I thought I can show you a little clip from the end of the film, which actually shows what the children, when they're growing up. It's a joint family, and so there are boys and there are girls, and sort of kind of the same age or age group, and what they feel free enough to do, and the girls don't feel free enough to do. So I'll just show you that. प्रितपाल, हर संडे को ऐसा काम करती हो घर में? क्या क्या करती हो?
चाटती हूँ, रोटी बनाती हूँ।
रोटियां बनाती हो?
एक दूसरे को दे देती हूँ, पढ़ा देती हूँ। इतने काम करते।
और बाकी बच्चे क्या क्या करते हैं?
बाकी मुंडे खेलते हैं, छोटे अंदर भी खेलती है, अंदर पढ़ाई करती है, और जो महक वो कर लेती है।
तो मुंडे घर में क्या करते हैं? कभी
खेलते रहते हैं।
मदद नहीं करते कभी? अच्छा, खेलने बाहर जाती हो?
जब मैं छोटी थी जब मैं जाती थी, बड़ी होगी अब नहीं जाने देती।
And so, Randhir Singh and Darshan Kaur's grandchildren will grow up together. They will share more than living space. They will share school, meal times and games. There will be a place for each of them. A place for Pritpal's brothers, a place for Pritpal and her sisters.
It's so lovely because what you can clearly see is that those children were really comfortable with you. You must have spent some time where they could answer. I mean, I think she was being very honest. I think she was being as honest as she could be.
Yeah.
And that's all you can ask for, when you're on the other side of the camera. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's funny. Like the more I hear us talking, what I really hear is we're talking about the principles of filmmaking, of documentary filmmaking. We're not talking about anything other than that. There's no asterisk for kids.
No, for kids.
There's an obvious kind of appropriateness, but you do very important things with them, and it's on their mind.
Absolutely, because children are in the world and they are absorbing all of these things, and you can't, it is only a certain kind of child, and even that kind of child, to what extent can you keep them in a protected kind of space, cut away from all of that? It's not possible. So I really feel that this is one of the key things is understanding that childhood is not, there is no one childhood.
Right.
So how do we allow for all of those childhoods to be, to have space in the kind of representations that are put out, so that we begin to understand that there is as much diversity in childhood as there is in humanity of, all kinds.
Right.
And then within those representations that we create, we are attempting, I think both you and I have spoken of that, there's this idea that they are more than just that one thing that they're supposed to represent,
Right.
that flattened kind of.
Right. Just as all of us as women, as filmmakers, no one word would define any of us ever.
Exactly.
And I think it's exactly the same for children, and any kind of storytelling, fiction or nonfiction, by and for kids, must have that open-mindedness. I think if anything, there's a kind of preordained culture of childhood that I think gets layered onto anything made for kids, particularly as I've seen it outside of outside of America. I think here we've come around to the idea that representing many voices in the younger community matters, and there's value to that. And I'm hoping that it that broadens out to places like India as well, because there's so much story to tell.
I think that there have been, in the sort of recent years, there is representations of children that are layered and nuanced, which we see in films that are not made necessarily for children.
For them.
But sometimes what happens, I think, is that when there is this approach of actually creating content for children, there's a certain flattening that happens. I don't know if that is coming from a kind of understanding that, for children, you have to simplify things. And so you kind of, remove the nuance. Whereas actually children are inhabiting a really complex world, and they are making sense of it, in their own ways. So you don't actually need to make something simplistic because it is for a child.
It's exactly. It's very nuanced, and you could never possibly take that away from any child, in trying to, even make a fun cartoon about them. There is a way to do that still has nuance. And I think that's kind of my dream. In my dream, I would be making really fun, really engaging and nuanced content in India for Indian kids, where they were seeing the entirety of what it means to be a kid in India these days, which is, such a vast thing. I think that what I still come up against as the seller of this kind of content, because at the end of the day, I'm a producer. So my job is to find it, source it, curate it, get it ready, and then pitch it to sell. And what I find is, I think there is the hill that we're still trying to climb is this hill around the culture of childhood and the culture of what kids need to become, to grow up. The culture of childhood has still not expanded to include, at the very beginning levels of children's content, say at the preschool level, something like early childhood education, like in the way that any kid here can put on PBS for free and get shows that teach them about early literacy, early number sequencing, all the stuff that you learn in preschool, basically, all wrapped up in a very fun show about maybe animals or people. I'm not sure that has reached the realm of having entertainment value in India yet. There's a culture around that separates it into purely educational and something else entirely. So I think that's one thing to contend with and still learn about and push the rock up the hill. I also think the other thing is purely fiscal and monetary, which is that they don't think that movies for kids will make them enough money, that they don't think the audience is there, that they don't think families value that. I have heard, and I would love to hear from folks in India like you, that, you know, historically the culture has been that the latest Hindi movie comes out and everybody in the house goes to it, no matter what your age is and no matter how appropriate or inappropriate it is. And I have remembered doing that with my family in India. Whereas here, you know, the family might go for the animated film, but the parents might go for, you know, the Marvel film or whatever. You know, there's slightly more pocketed content. And, you know, the likes of Pixar and Disney live and die but by us taking our children to see this content, which is getting better and better. So that's how I observe it from the outside, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
For us in India, to be able to bring the childhood of the, you know, the Dalit child, the Adivasi child, the child who lives in the Basti, bringing those childhoods into the center is really important, because otherwise we are creating, particularly like those of us who write in English, you know, we end up writing like only this small little bubble is reading us, and that's just not enough. Can someone like me, who comes from the kind of background that I do, can I write about that? Should I write about that?
These are real questions.
Yeah.
These are real questions.
Then how do we enable writing to come from within? And that is really the thing that needs to be done. You know?
And I think
as
much as like finding stories and finding TV show ideas and producing them, those of us who are enabled and can try and build some of this stuff into the work.
There have to be many different voices creating stories, telling stories from, and it has to be in a kind of collaborative way to begin with, perhaps, and then, you know, it sort of.
And then it can kind of fly on its own, which is really like the dream, you know, it's really the dream. And this is as much about telling stories about certain kinds of kids and communities as it is about maybe one day empowering those kids to tell their own stories. Samina, I do wonder, the stuff that you're seeing, you know, on OTTs and on TV in India, for kids specifically, because you probably see much more contemporary stuff than I've seen since the last time I was in India. What do you like? What do you not like? What do you observe about it? I'm just curious your thoughts.
Much of it is in this sort of, you know, edutainment mode, you know, because it comes again from this understanding of childhood as a space which has to be enabled. You know, children have to be taught and children have to be, rather than just a sharing of experiences. I think there have been sort of some films which are not specifically for children. There was a series, you know, one of these anthologies that was done for Netflix. And Zoya Akhtar did a film in that, a short. It's called Sheila Ki Jawani. And it's been lovely to use that to just talk to kids about, you know, gender and sexuality. So there have been things like that which are good, and you know, I think we really should appreciate those efforts that have been made, but it's really just not enough. So we don't always have to tell some big dramatic story, no? There are those
slice of life. Yeah. I think I agree with you. I think slice of life, the sort of like industry parlance is that's not high concept enough. What that means is there is no, you know, there's no hook, like no one's a superhero and no one travels through time, or they're not on a spaceship, all of which, by the way, I actually think is really fun and awesome. And there's a way to even do that in a nuanced way if you're good at writing.
Do you think that if you were not doing this, you would be doing something else?
I have like a two-pronged answer to that, which is that I have like the boring answer, which is that I'm actually weirdly very interested in the intellectual property side of what we do, because I do things like look at books all the time and think about what else they can be. So maybe in a boring world, if I wasn't doing this, I would still be in entertainment, but I'd be like a lawyer, you know, like an IP lawyer or something. But otherwise, I think I would curate art. I think I would curate art, or I think I'd be, I don't know, maybe an interior designer or something. I love things like textiles and yeah, those are things that just bring me joy. And I cook. I love to cook. But I love to cook so much that I never want to turn it into a job. I just like to feed people that I love. How about you?
Well, so the thing is, I do so many different things. I mean, I make films, but I also write, I also teach, and I do some research. So I feel I get an opportunity to do many different kinds of things, and I don't want to give that up. I would have, maybe one or other combination of this kind of little potpourri.
That means you're living your dream. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think I'm really grateful that I get a chance to do all this. So I think it's whatever the material sort of pushes me, the direction the material pushes me in, I kind of go in that direction. So sometimes it's a film, and sometimes it's text, and sometimes it's a research project, and I'm writing.
And I think that's actually
academic frame.
My pragmatic brain says that that's a very smart way to lead one's media career, also to be very open to mediums and media and the possibilities. I feel like we could keep talking for.
We could, yeah. There's much more to talk.
But I guess I'll be the one to kind of just put a pin in this conversation, pause this conversation. I don't want to say end it, because I think it's actually just beginning, and I really hope that those of you who watch and share this conversation actually share in this conversation with us, meaning like have this conversation far and wide with many people. And they don't have to be people who work in the kids space, in the kids and, in this kind of family space. I actually think there's so much value to having this conversation in a broader, entertainment, literature, industry conversation, because I think
that's really important. I agree, because if we are saying children are part of the world, then we must listen to them when we are talking about.
That's right. So I'll leave it at that. I want to thank Bichitra for getting us together. I'm so happy that we got to meet, because now we get to work together, I hope.
Yes, I hope
and,
so.
Have
more conversations.
Totally. More conversations, and hopefully really, really good work down the road. So thank you, Samina.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Priya. And thank you, Bichitra.